Welcome. Today I'm talking to Dr. Nasir Andisha, the ambassador of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to the United Nations in Geneva. I'm emphasizing the name of his government to make it clear that the ambassador is not representing the Taliban regime that took over his country almost precisely half a year ago, but he represents the last democratically elected government that was ousted and went into exile. The sad developments in his home were big news last August, but public attention has since shifted back to Europe. Ambassador Andisha will update us about the recent developments and also what they mean for Afghan diplomacy. Now, Dr. Andisha is also a scholar. And for the sake of full disclosure to our viewership, I would like to add that he and I wrote an article together on Ukraine, and he has been contributing to another scholarly project of mine and gave a webinar in our research group 5 months ago. So I am certainly inclined to view him as a friend and an ally in the struggle for peaceful solutions to current conflicts. Ambassador Andisha studied in Europe and the United States. He got his PhD from Asia Pacific College of Diplomacy at the Australian National University. He served as the Director of Multilateral Economic Relations and International Financial Institutions. He was then appointed ambassador in 2011, serving in Australia, New Zealand, and in the Republic of Fiji. He later became the Deputy Foreign Minister for Management and Resources in his home, Afghanistan. And as I said, he's currently the ambassador and permanent representative of Afghanistan to the United Nations in Geneva. Thank you very much, Ambassador Andisha, for taking the time. And let me start with a personal question to you. Like, how are you? How is your family? And especially your family back home? Are you all getting by?
Thank you very much. I'm doing okay. You know, I just hit bottom and raising up, you know, in terms of everything, in terms of the collapse of a country and a government, and also, you know, personally, family, friends, and everyone who left behind in Afghanistan, and few who are still in the process of evacuation in the pipeline in the neighboring countries, you know, in camps in Europe. But you know, we as Afghans, we have a particular resilience based on which, you know, we have sustained ourselves in a very difficult part of the world, which is, you know, in the middle of all these difficulties. So we have to, you know, dust up, get up quickly and move on, because, you know, this train of history does not stop for us to, you know, to recuperate. So I'm doing okay, family is fine, and I'm in touch with the rest of the family who are still inside Afghanistan. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that your family is doing okay, and I can only imagine how difficult this position must be that you're holding right now, especially because you're representing now a government that is not in power anymore. There are examples, of course, in history when things like that happened, and sometimes times get difficult. I mean, ask anyone from Taiwan how difficult diplomacy is. I imagine you're somewhat in a position like that, but I was trying to come up with examples like the Tibetan government in exile. Your government is in exile, but where is it? Where is your government at the moment?
Mm-hmm. You see, there are two things in the position I'm sitting, which besides being ambassador to Switzerland, I'm mostly involved with the United Nations office in Geneva. And the United Nations office in Geneva, you know, has a very peculiar side to it. And the most important element of that is humanitarian world, as well as the human rights. So I think this is where my position is much more probably easier, but at the same time exciting, at the same time, you know, rewarding in Geneva, because I not only raise the voice of a particular government in the sense of, you know, prime minister, a president, and the minister, but also a people which have been taken hostage by, you know, by a group which a major part of it is designated as a terrorist group, is a group that the world, international community, United States, through a UN resolution, fought and dislodged, and they were harboring terrorism, and a group because of whose return even the US court is reopening a case against bin Laden. So, if when you are sitting in my position, you will feel a huge responsibility that, should continue that struggle, because you understand that the group who has taken power by the barrel of the guns is going against everything Geneva, everything international system, everything human rights. And I believe, despite whatever, romanticization that people in the region or some people around the world will do of the Taliban as being, endogenous people, blah, 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 I will say no. This is an anomaly in the third decade of 21st century. So I'm sitting here and I'm, trying to defend the human rights of the Afghan people. I'm arguing for the humanitarian assistance to reach unimpeded, impartial, and inclusive to everyone in Afghanistan who is in need, not only to fall in the hands of, a group of insurgent terrorist Taliban. So I'm sitting also here to raise the voice of all those men and women who have been, victims of enforced disappearance, victims of, arbitrary detention. So I think that gave me lots of energy and power, and certainly we have all our embassies. No embassy of Afghanistan has surrendered to Taliban. Thankfully, the world has not recognized them as a state. In fact, last week they were here, a group of Taliban invited by Geneva Call. But certainly, when they're invited in Geneva Call, it is applied or implied that they are seen as armed non-state actors. This is what Geneva Call engages with, because Geneva Call was working with me and still is working with me here. So I think that is I know peculiar in terms of diplomats and diplomacy around the world, but personally for me it's a very challenging, at the same time rewarding job that I'm doing, and perhaps it's something that I could maybe write and leave for the new generation of diplomats.
Oh yes, you have to. I mean, this position that you're in right now is very special and happens only every 2 or 3 decades or so, when diplomats get stranded, basically. But that's why I was wondering, like, how does your everyday look like? Are you mainly working with the official UN bodies or with other organizations at the moment?
No, I work. I don't call it normally, but as usual, with everyone. We also run our consular section, which looks after some of these Afghan asylum seekers here in Switzerland. I work with all the international organizations. We issue visas, for people who want to go still for humanitarian work in Afghanistan. And I represent the country fully, because I'm the only representative Afghanistan has here, no matter what the country is. So that's understandable. And since I know, human rights is not completely apolitical, but I think also the Taliban understand that, they cannot have any voice in human rights until they do not change and respect the human rights. So that's why still, we are the voice of human rights, and we are the voice of that 36 to 37 million Afghans who are there. So and I'm in touch with civil society groups inside Afghanistan.
But you're saying you're still issuing visas. That means the ruling regime in Kabul actually recognizes the visas you are issuing for people then to enter the country.
You see that that's not a recognized regime. So the system of all the systems in the state of Afghanistan is still running on the basis of a recognized government or recognized system, which is the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. The passports are the same passport. The currency is the currency which was issued by the central bank, and the signature is still, the signature of former finance minister before. Our football team is now playing, doing a very good job in Central Asia, beating, a number of countries. They're wearing the same flag that I have, behind me here. And I think this is how things are running, because they don't have this system. And they understand that, they have to either accept international norms, or they can be, a pariah group holding a capital. The capital of Yemen is also controlled by a group, but it doesn't mean that that's the state.
So is it fair to say that the Taliban were able to kind of cut off the head of the government, but the rest of the body is still working as it did in before August 16?
You see that we have to separate two things: from state from a government. I think the state of Afghanistan is one of the oldest members of the international community. We joined UN in 1946, together with Iceland and Sweden. November 19, it's almost 75 years. So, and I've been very engaged in the UN system, in the regional organizations, in many of this norm making around the world. We were norm taker, but also in part of the norm making. So with a group coming in and temporarily, because they also came in 96 to 2001, holding on to the capital and the buildings, I don't call that a state. So state in entirety, a society, a member of international community, a geography exists. So a group is jumping in by crazy power of their gun and the power of their suicide violence. So the rest of the society does not want to be as violent as they are. So they might, control that piece of land for some time. So yes, the answer is the state institutions exist, but the head of government, which is of course a president, and he really, honestly, cowardly decided to leave the country instead of moving to another part of the country and keeping his, state or government resisting the same way as I'm telling you that Yemen has, Libya has something like this right now. Even in the Myanmar, yes, the prime minister is or the head of the government is in prison, but still, there exists a parliament, and the same was to some extent in Venezuela. But our head of state, he decided to leave the country and flew out, which is really unfortunate, and he left the rest of the government stranded.
Yeah, I do think he probably remembered what happened to the last head of government that was captured by the Taliban in 1996, right? But
well, it was not necessary for him to be captured. I mean, he still had pieces of land in the country where he could go in. But the question is that if he would have not gone, probably the country would have not fallen to the Taliban. I think that jury is still out, because once you remove in, and that is what maybe could be part of our discussion, is that it's also going back to the architecture or the structure of a very centralized state where everything sums up in the person of a president. I think if it was a decentralized state, if it was in a state where a prime minister or a head of a government can be taken over or can leave, but still the institution can stay, I think that is also part of the problem in Afghanistan, which we as a sort of new generation of Afghan academic politicians and diplomats trying to solve for the future. So we should not face this kind of problem, because every time a person who reduces the whole state and his personality leaves, the system will evaporate. And I think that has not to be the case. We have seen changes of government in many places around the world, from Latin America to Africa to parts of Asia. But one person or maybe a cabinet, 5, 10, 15 people living here and there should not result in the collapse of the whole state. And certainly that's a very troubled feature of Afghanistan's politics, which means it's very centralized, one person state who is everything. And the minute that person is not there, then there is no rest of the loyalty or institution, which could keep the institutions of the state. And then we have to rebuild everything from zero.
But on the other hand, you're saying that the institutions at the moment that were there are still running. And as I guess the Foreign Office, your office is still running. So the Taliban did not try to get rid of all the public servants and eliminate all the institutions. That didn't happen, right?
You see, that's what it's just a small example. Foreign Office is a small example. Although the building of Foreign Office and the diplomats who left in Kabul are now under the Taliban, and they appointed an acting minister. But what I'm saying is that imagine if it was a decentralized system, if the parliament could move to another city, if Parliament had power to remove the president before we reached a point where this situation became inevitable. Imagine if the head of state and head of government were two people, where the security forces could have stayed loyal, and then they did not need to evaporate and disappear because their commander in chief has left the country. So I think that's what I'm saying, is that these idea of checks and balances, the idea of having different pillars. I mean, we call it 3 pillars of a state, is that even if one pillar fails or fall, then the whole of state could stand on the other 2 pillars. I mean, we saw it in Pakistan around President Pervez Musharraf, who was a military dictator. There, it was the judiciary. You can't believe it. The judges of Pakistan, which is a very strong institution left by British in that part of the world, they came together and they really made it very difficult for the president to stay and to continue changing perhaps the constitution, because they were changing it from a parliamentary system to a presidential one. And they basically forced the president out in a way that the judiciary joined hand with the parliament, with the rest of political groups, oppositions. And the president, despite being a military general, did not have a choice in a country like Pakistan, where a military is everything. So that's what I'm saying, that institutions in Afghanistan, the whole structure of an institution from day one, from 2001, was built up on a very centralized foundation. And centralized foundations are very much susceptible to big shocks. I mean, in the sense that they are fragile. And if you wanted to make it, anti-fragile in places where always turbulent, you have to make it, like you're in Japan. We talk of just, give you the example of architecture and buildings in Japan. So you have to make it, flexible. So when there is earthquakes, it can move, but cannot fall. And our system was not like that. It was very strict, like a piece of dry wood. You have to either break it, otherwise you can't bend it.
But do you see, I remember our previous conversation where you were saying that the Taliban that are now in power face exactly the same structural problems inside the country and outside the country that the previous government did, just with slightly different power modifications, because the Americans are further away, but they're still putting pressure, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But do you see a chance that the current rulers would start implementing something like federalization that would be needed in order to create this kind of decentralized structures?
Unfortunately, I don't see any sign of that happening, because as an ideological group, they are also very, very centralized in their thinking, because they wanted to implement very strict and perhaps medieval interpretation of religion, of Islam. So that's why when you look at this, it's the concept that they actually follow, which they have serious difficulty explaining it to the rest of the world, is perhaps the concept of Khilafat. Of course, they don't say it in that way, because if they say, then they will be associated with the IS. So they believe that their leader is the leader of faithful. So when there's a leader of faithful, then there's one person, and that is the representative of God on the earth. That's why I'm saying it's an anomaly. The world, Europe, everybody else say goodbye to this kind of system. At least a couple of centuries back, but in Afghanistan it repeats, it comes back. So the idea of decentralization exists in their mind, but in the terms of a leader of faithful, and then you have different provinces where there is a representative of this person, and that person and that leader could implement the Sharia on the basis of fatwas or something from this main leader. So it is strictly centralized according to their views and their vision. But the interesting thing is, they as a movement, as an insurgent terrorist movement, it was a very decentralized, because this is how they continued their insurgency. Their leadership was always in Pakistan. Their families are still in Pakistan. It's ironic that, 6 months that they are holding power, their families are still living in Quetta and Peshawar and different places in Karachi. So, but the insurgency was decentralized because they used to get their resources by extortion, by taxing people, partly by the trafficking and protecting the opium smuggling networks. So now the idea is how they should centralize this, because there is another difficulty for them centralizing the rest of the government. Now that they are government, so they wanted to centralize. I think this is always a difficulty, and also Afghanistan it's a very diverse society, and the Taliban represent mostly the Southern Pashtun groups, because this is where they come from. This is where the leadership is. If you look at number 1 to number 10, so these are all the same category of people. The lingua franca that they speak is not understandable in the rest of the country. Perhaps 60% more of the country doesn't understand. They basically cannot communicate with them easily. So I think these are some of the difficulties, but I don't see the sign of they believing in decentralization, because they know that in a country like Afghanistan, the minute they accept this, the regions are always historically in Afghanistan more powerful, more influential, and more relevant than the center, because we have 5-6 regions in Afghanistan, and each region economically, of course, geographically, commercially, and culturally connected to an adjacent major city in a different country. Like, for example, if you talk of Western Afghanistan, the city of Herat, which is the gateway to India, is a historical city, it's one of the center of culture there, poetry, miniatures, things like this. It says music. That is always connected economically, culturally, language-wise to the adjacent city of Mashhad in Iran, in the other side, and to Turkmenistan in its north. So you go there, it's part of an old Persia. The same is, for example, for Jalalabad, which is in the east of the country, is very much connected to Peshawar in Pakistan. Still, you go there, the currency, Pakistani currency, is in circulation. You have the same music, you have, they speak same language, Pashto in the two places. And economic-wise, they're very much connected. They don't come to Kabul for something. Maybe they come to Kabul for government work, but for business, for commerce, even for weddings, for things, they go to the other side of the line into Pakistan. So I think that's the whole geography and topography of the country. So the system in Afghanistan always belie the reality of the country, which is a decentralized, which is a federalized by nature. But always the governments in Afghanistan run against the nature, runs against the reality of this country. And that has something to do with the mix of population and historical historical things, which I don't want to bore you here at this stage. It's a long other story.
Yeah, but the problem is, like, Afghanistan never had a decentralized system, right? It was a kingdom for a long time, and several successions of kings until then the upheaval in the 70s and the communist regime, which was also very centralized. So in a sense, history-wise, it doesn't bode well for federalizing the state in order to remodel what's already on the ground.
I think that's the major problem, because it's basically was a decentralized system because it was part of an empire always. So different parts of the country, as I say, they were kind of self-sustained autonomous regions, and these autonomous regions were also ethnic regions. For example, you have the Turkic community of Afghanistan, you have the Persian community of Afghanistan, then you have the Pashtun community, and within the Pashtun community you have two major tribes, the eastern ones, the Ghaljais, and the southern one, mostly the Duranis. So there was, whenever they come together not even in a model of a federation, but actually in a model of a confederation. Mm. And the capital of this confederation used to change from Kabul to Ghazni during Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi. The Ghaznavi dynasty, they ruled half of India, but also some of Central Asia. The capital was in Kabul. So it was not a centralized system. It was actually a very decentralized one. And then it was the Ghoris, which was also controlling Delhi, but the capital was in Ghor, close to Herat. And later on, the Duranis, which is the rest of the Pashtun dynasties are coming from that. The capital was Kandahar, but the borders were in Kashmir or Delhi, and in Punjab of today, even in parts of Iran. But it doesn't mean that for example, Badakhshan of Afghanistan was part of a centralized empire in Kandahar in Kabul. No, Badakhshan was a kingdom at the time. Like Mazar Balkh was its own autonomous region. Herat was the same, and each region had their own governor general that was paying some tributes to government in Kabul, but in the rest of the things they were independent. And when there was an attack from across, for example, from the Tsarist Russia or from the Persian Empire or things like this, then they will solicit some support from wherever the capital was in Kabul or in Ghazni or in Kandahar. So that's actually a de facto. This country has always been a federation of basically three people: the Pashtuns, the Tajiks, the Persian speakers, and then the Turks, the Uzbeks. And then, of course, we have a Hazara Shia community. So they came together, and then in their internal affairs, always, they were independent because of geography. It's very difficult for central state to have its control. And because of the no communication line, still we don't have let's say, a rail system. A train system is not there in that country. So for somebody to reach Badakhshan, you have to go either by plane or it takes many days to reach, and going through gorges and valleys. And if a tribe decides not to let you, they can just close the gate of the valley, and you can't go. You have to bring the whole army. So I think that is the contradiction. Yes, Afghanistan since 1893, which is, we call it Afghanistan from now. This is something that we have to bear in mind, that before that, it used to be called Khorasan. And that was, before that, it was part of an empire of the Duranis and I say the Persians and the Turks and the Tajiks in the north, the Samani empires. But from 1893, which the British force came to accept the boundaries, with this current boundary, we are from 1893 till now, and since then, which is 100 and now maybe 50 years, or 140 years, there is always an attempt to centralize, and every time this centralization attempt comes to an end at the end of each 20 years, at the end of each president. So that's what we argue, a group of academics and young Afghans, that look, it's going against the nature, it's going against the geography of the country, and especially in the age and the time of democracy, where people's decentralization and democratic aspiration is a main force. And now we have very educated, considering the rest of Afghanistan history, we have a very educated community. In the past 20 years, they have seen what democracy means. They've seen what human rights mean. They've seen what the rights of different ethnic groups means, what the right of women means. I think it's very, very difficult for any group, including Taliban or whatever government comes in the future, to re-centralize Afghanistan. Genie is out of the box in Afghanistan. It is decentralized, but we have two choices: either to accept a political decentralization of a country and still keep it an entity, a united entity, but a decentralized one, like the one I'm sitting here in Switzerland, or you have to go to something, a painful experience like Balkans, the Balkanization, because in our own area, you're also doing this neutrality studies and the geopolitics. When you have viable states, especially ethnic states, around a geographical entity, which is called Afghanistan, and you have communities, you have, cross-border nationalism, then the unit in the middle is always in turbulence. It makes it very difficult, makes it very, very hard for that state to sustain. I was, coming across a literature recently that states can die. There is a death of state, especially when this artificial states. So because Afghanistan was, as I said, geographically sandwiched in the middle of Tsarist Russia and then Communist Russia and Soviet Union and the British Empire and later on the American Empire. So this entity served as a buffer. And then later on, it became a country because this is how, it was made. If you look at the Wakhan corridor, which extends, which gives us, some 71-mile border with China, it was actually in 1882, 83, an agreement between the foreign secretary of British and the foreign minister of Tsarist Russia, that they agreed that this port should be given to Afghanistan so that could separate. Our king at the time, he was not accepting it because of very, difficult mountainous region with no resources. He said, what should I do with it? They say, no, take it. They said, take it, we'll give you some subsidies to keep it. And the reason that part was given to Afghanistan, which, thankfully, thanks God that we have it now, because, it's a natural beauty and it's a natural park right now, which has a lot of wildlife and things like this. And one of, a beautiful ethnic group, Kyrgyz are living there, they are still in a very nomadic community. But at the time we were like, how can we can't go even there. It will take us, many days to reach. But the idea was to create a buffer where, the Indian, British India and Tsarist Russia could not come face to face. So to reduce the possibility of, any kind of fighting or skirmishes. And then there is an extension to the Xinjiang or Xinjiang province of China, which is, mostly again the same kind of people. Our Tajik and Turkic people are living in Kashgar. They're living, in Tashqorghan and the other side in Urumqi. So that's what this country is. And now you have after 1947, you have Pakistan as a new state, which already became a threat to the state of Afghanistan, because more than half of the Pashtun population remained on the other side of the border in a new country called Pakistan. So when you talk of Afghan nation, you look at the Pashtun nation of Afghanistan. They are strongly represented in Pakistan. The Pakistani prime minister right now is a Pashtun. The Pakistani, head of army a number of times, they're very well versed in a state called Pakistan. It's a viable state, nuclear state, a coastal state. So the Pashtuns in Afghanistan have brethren on the other side who are, much more stable, much more stronger and represented. After 1992, but still it was, the definition of Afghanistan was we always try to, quarrel with Pakistan that, please give us, the rest of our country and this community is ours. Of course, it was a useless discussion because, once, these boundaries of international community is drawn and the world recognizes it, you have to either go to the court or you have to be powerful enough to take it back like what, Russia is doing. But it was not possible. It created more headache for us and for Pakistanis, which, the result of, is part of the turbulence that we are facing is that Diur line issue. So let alone the Diur line issue, because the Diur line issue could always be used by our presidents and some Pashtun nationalists as a force, as an argument to unify the rest of the country, that we have a common enemy in the name of Pakistan. Let all communities, Persians, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras, and the Pashtuns unite. And that was the thinking of our fathers and grandfathers. But now fast forward, 1992, we have three other states, ethnic state, independent in the north of the country, which is Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, which has substantial ethnic groups inside northern Afghanistan. So this is a question which came to, to many minds that if you have, again, this entity which has, you know, either if it is the base or if it is part, but has all these ethnic groups where they have viable states across border. And this is always in turbulence. They cannot agree to create a decentralized state where they can, you know, work with each other. And they don't have also the power to bring everyone, because the Afghanistan, unlike Switzerland, which you have a majority, but still, you know, they are very humble to say that we are not a majority. In Afghanistan, there is no majority. I mean, if the community is 40 or less than 40%, it's never a majority. So you have a Pashtun community, and then you have the Persian Tajik community, and all of them. So there is no clear majority like China or, you know, somewhere else where you can just dominate, create a state, and the rest of the small minorities has to follow you if they like it or not. That's not possible in Afghanistan. Even Taliban itself, the minute Taliban talks about, you know, Pashtun nationalism, they will disintegrate, because the other Taliban groups, smaller or bigger, they can, you know, they can join or they can call themselves independent, and then there will be, you know, another difficulty. So 1992 onward, and the state of Tajikistan. So the Tajiks of Afghanistan right now, when the Taliban attacked, they just crossed the border and went into Tajikistan. And now Tajikistan government, although small, although the number of Tajiks in Tajikistan is lesser than the Tajiks of Afghanistan. There's more Tajiks in Afghanistan than in Tajikistan. It's the same thing that, you know, there's more Pashtuns in Pakistan than in Afghanistan. The Uzbeks of Afghanistan has a connection to Uzbekistan. The Turkmens of Afghanistan has a connection to Turkmenistan. And these states in the past 25 years, they have proven to be, you know, sustainable states. Yes, they are ethnic states. Their name is Tajikistan, means the state of Tajiks. Huh? So, if there's a question, a rhetorical question for, you know, for students of political science and state, what if this, you know, entity is always in turbulence, and you cannot create a nation around an idea, because Taliban cannot create a nation, because the idea is the idea of Islam, and Islam, all the other stances are also part of Islam. So that's not in the age of nation state. The question of, you know, political Islam is not a viable way of state building. So the whole thing is, the whole idea I'm thinking is that that we have to either decentralize in an understanding that we are better off being a country united around a very deep historical legacy that we have, more than Pakistan and more than Central Asia. Can we do this? Because Afghanistan, as I said, is much, you know, historical, is much stronger in terms of its tradition of statehood than Pakistan and than Central Asia. Or if we can continue, you know, this kind of every 20 years, a group comes from the north, then a group comes from the south, and, you know, take the government, make it inclusive of them, and then the rest of the country unites against it and, you know, throw it out. If that trend continues, it can also even question the viability of Afghan state of Afghanistan. And the last point is, President Biden has a number of times mentioned, you know, I know it's a person, maybe it's his personal thinking, not the thinking of the government of the United States, that this is not a one country. And that's really worrisome. When Biden said that, look, you know, you cannot bring these people under one government or under one state, mean that they are different states. And we have examples of Somalia, you have example of now Iraq. Kurdistan is almost, you know, a region by itself. So, and now President Biden also, you know, got away with the sovereign funds of Afghanistan, which was, you know, the basic financial resource of the country, which means that, you know, they're, to me, my interpretation is that the US is done with state. So they're not going to help Taliban to become a state. And if Taliban cannot become a state, they are a force. They could be a pariah force, maybe in southern Afghanistan. And in the next summer, we will see, you know, forces coming back from the north. And I don't know what's going to unfold. So that's kind of, you know, an answer to your question that centralization. I will say that centralization doesn't work in Afghanistan, will not work, and it's actually a threat to our nationhood. not the other way around. Decentralization is not a threat. Some people might think that decentralization or federalism will divide this country. I'm saying that no, the country is divided. Federalization is a way, or decentralization is a way that can bring these divide elements together, because we are more stronger, more viable as a one entity rather than a number of small entities.
The one state that managed to rally under the banner of Islam and create a nation around it is Iran, right? I mean, they were more or less successful with that. But for the Taliban themselves have large divisions within them, right? So even within their group, this should be difficult to achieve unity, political unity. But you mentioned something very important, very, very current, that Mr. Biden, President Biden, on Friday last week, declared that 7 billion out of the 9 billion that were frozen in the Federal Reserve of Afghan reserve money would be unblocked, but half of it will be given to victims of 9/11 or the families of victims of 9/11, and then the other half will be somehow dispersed in whatever way to aid agencies. But all of this is very unclear, and it sounds at the moment as if though the US administration is aiming at permanently depriving the Afghan central bank from accessing its own funds, which are needed in order to keep the money circulation in the country going. What are your views on that? Can this be supported in any sense? I mean, this makes no sense to me. I think this is outrageous, absolutely. Whatever you think about the Taliban, but the economy of Afghanistan and of the people of Afghanistan, this has to work somehow. And there's a famine at the moment, or there's a threat of a famine at the moment, and I think the situation is quite dire. So, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think I was quoted by the Foreign Policy magazine saying that exactly what I mentioned here, that to me, as sort of an analyst, let alone being an Afghan diplomat and also a concerned Afghan citizen, connecting the points which President Biden has said about Afghanistan since he was vice president in 2010, and his actions makes me really worried about the future of Afghanistan as far as the US is concerned, or US democratic administration is concerned, because I see this as part of the quantum of these actions by President Biden, but the others may not share my probably this somehow gloomy interpretation. For example, the special envoy for Afghanistan, Mr. Thomas West, had a very good interaction with the USIP. He had a different interpretation, which I listened to this morning, saying that, look, you know what, we have actually helped by this this executive order has been interpreted in a wrong way. So we are providing $3.5 billion of this fund into humanitarian action in Afghanistan, not necessarily through UN, but also through some other mechanism to reinforce blah, blah, and all of this stuff. And then the rest of them will stay because the court, we are in a situation with the court. And although the court, they have sued, this number is much higher than 3.5 billion. I think it's around $7 or $9 billion. So, but we don't know because the court has not decided. But you see here, action speaks louder than the words, because there are two things. This was the sovereign fund of a country. This was a guarantee of our currency. And part of it, around 1 billion of this, was the deposits, including my deposits and my family's deposit in the local banks in Afghanistan, which are not able to pay us right now. My father goes there, he stands in the queue, the whole day, and he can only receive $300 at the end of the day. So this, even giving it through some humanitarian assistance, or giving it to the victims, in the principle, it's completely unacceptable. It's just like I invite you for my birthday, and then I'll ask I'll pay from your own money, and you owe me some, I owe you some money and I pay you from that, and then I counted later on, that, okay, I gave you that dinner, but then it was part of the money you owe me. So I think this is ridiculous. But then there's another fundamental question, which people have to ask, that why this is happening legally, because the court and the plaintiff are kind of, they have reinvigorated the case since 16th of August. Because before 16th of August, this case was against the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan in 2001, started, okay? And then the Islamic Emirate disappeared in January of 2001 or February. So the case against Islamic Republic, I was a diplomat a number of times in the US. I knew about this case, but we say, look, the Islamic Emirate is no more here. It was not even a recognized entity. So the case is resurrected because Taliban called themselves the Islamic Emirate after 16th of August, in contradiction against the wishes of the Afghan people, in contradiction to UN Security Council Resolution February of 2020, which was Resolution 2513, and against their own promises that they will not resurrect, they will not, bring back their defunct emirate. So just by the name of the emirate, we are losing this money. I mean, technically speaking. So I think there are two parties to be blamed. Number one, the Taliban. Number two, the United States. And the victim is always the Afghan people, including, our families who have savings in the banks.
I absolutely agree. It's also an example of how the United States repeatedly and now again is weaponizing its position of the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world, because that's the only reason why this money is being kept there in the first place, to shore up the Afghani, your own currency. Right. But so my question here is there a chance that the Afghan central bank can somehow switch to other assets that it might still have? Are there still assets in China or in Russia that can help shore up the currency? Although most of the goods that you buy in Afghanistan, I guess, would be denominated in US dollars, right? Can you explain a little bit how the economy works at the moment? The money economy?
The money economy is perhaps in the most terrible situation. And that's why, when I worry about the state as we understand it, international relations and political science is non-existent in Afghanistan, because it's maybe in that definition of two centuries back, yes, it's a group which monopolizes the use of violence by whatever mean, which is by an illegal mean, in a given territory over a certain population. I think that elements are there. But apart from that, the elements of a modern states, banking system, commerce, international recognition, doesn't exist. Consent of the people, nothing, zero. So in fact, right now, there is no central bank there is a central bank of Afghanistan, which exists, there's a building of it. But there is no connection between this central bank and any other entity outside. Like, for example, they cannot do any transaction and they cannot receive any transaction. So the banking system like now is that whatever currency, which is denominated mostly in the US dollar, it comes through the UN agencies. I think per week, $35 million, something like this. Then it's not even given to the central bank because they are under the sanctions. It's given to one of our domestic bank, which is a reputable one, internationally recognized, and has the SWIFT system. And that bank disperses, and of course, this bank, then it's exchanged. This dollar is exchanged through the central bank. So the central bank still holds the Afghani currency, which is there in the circulation. It comes to them. So this is how they get some dollars. But it doesn't come to them. The dollar does not come to them. They cannot go to give this dollar out in the market. So the dollar goes into a local bank, and the local bank has some relationship with the central bank, and then they collect the currency from the currency traders, in open market. We have this small exchanges, currency exchange market in Kabul. So those people will come with the Afghani currencies and they get to exchange it. But that's a very limited. It's a very limited operation. So it's basically sort of almost a barter. I know it's a barter of hard currency versus dollar versus Afghani. But the imports, most of the imports are happening right now through Pakistan with a Pakistani currency. And that's, again, it tells you how much dependent this government is becoming on Pakistanis and on Pakistan, because you can import the essential goods of staples from Pakistan with the Pakistani currency, which is to some extent in circulation in eastern and southern Afghanistan.
How about China? Is there no stepping up of China in order to try to fill the vacuum?
Chinese at the beginning, they were somehow excited and that, look, you know what, we can do things with Taliban and this can change to a viable state. They can bring some sort of stability, and they can also deliver the Uyghurs, especially this the Turkestan movement fighters and things like this. But when they jumped in and when they talk to the Taliban and when they look at the division, internal division among them, and they look at the ideological question vis-a-vis these foreign fighters, and the broader implication of a group like Taliban, who does not respect anything international, including women's rights and things like this, and being a huge burden, because traditionally China is not a country which can give you huge grants of billions of dollars. So they come up with some humanitarian assistance, and then if there is trade business, they will do business. Otherwise, they are not part of these huge humanitarian interventions or state building interventions. So in the first 2-3 months, they're very excited, but then I think they are now stepping back. We don't see serious Chinese engagement now as leading or filling the vacuum, because after 15th of August or after 31st of August, to be sure, there is a strategic vacuum in Afghanistan, because there is no. I mean, the Americans were there, and now that is even the airport security is not clear that who is responsible for it. So the Chinese find out, or maybe that was their understanding, that even if we step in, this is perhaps a trap by United States laying it for us, so we can just get in and we will be engaged and involved, and we have to be responsible for making Taliban a responsible government. And I think they have stepped back. Yes, they have an embassy like many of our neighbors in Kabul. They send few COVID vaccines and masks and few tons of food supplies or medicine, but nothing more than that. No. I think China understood the enormity of the task, and they are stepping back, not getting involved in this issue of Taliban.
We're nearing an hour, so maybe I'll ask you a last question, which is, are there any elements within the regime that is currently in power in Kabul that you think you as a diplomat could work with? Is there any chance of diplomatic interaction with them, or does this have to remain separate, and is your recommendation to never recognize them, to not recognize them as an international actor?
In their current disposition, in the current configuration, it's the answer is no, because the caretaker, or whatever government they call it, is not representative of all Afghans. It's not representative of the Afghan woman. It's not representative of anything Afghanistan. It actually goes contrary to the diversity and to the national unity of that country, and it's actually a threat, as I say. Is there elements whom could be part of a system, a recognized system? Of course, yes. Taliban, most of them, are part of the Afghan, the fabric of the Afghan society. They represent a way of thinking in the country. They represent a strong community of Afghanistan, conservative, tribal, religious community, mostly from the south of the country. They can be part of any government, and they should have been part of the government. And even there have been a number of people who were engaged in the negotiation for the past 2 years in Doha, who understand, the complexity and nuances of international relations. I will say, yes, there are elements, and even those are the elements which trying to engage with Europe and the rest of the country and the rest of the world. But that element is very small, and because of where they stand and the kind of violence they perpetrated a number of years, it's very difficult for them to separate themselves from the rest, because the minute they separate, they will be again a small group of liberal Taliban, which nobody will really care about. So I think there is still a possibility, theoretically speaking, of creating a more representative government, creating an inclusive system, maybe an interim or transitional administration on the basis of some technocratic elements, and then we can move toward a permanent system on the basis of a decentralized, neutral country. Yes.
Thank you very much. Those are very good last words to end the interview. Ambassador Andisha, thank you for taking the time, and I hope to speak to you soon again in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.